He tried to murder my only daughter with insulin, slow and quiet, so the world would call it a tragedy and hand him her fortune. Tonight, I took every dollar he has, every door he walks through, every breath he thinks is safe. Welcome to Brian's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Marcus Thorne. Most people only ever say that name in a whisper, the way you say hurricane or earthquake, something that arrives without warning and leaves nothing standing. I'm 71 years old, and I have spent 51 of those years making sure that when I walk into a room, every conversation stops before the doors fully open. I own 3 of the tallest buildings in Chicago, half the container ships that leave the port of Los Angeles on any given Tuesday, and the quiet little bank in Zurich that still launders money for people who believe themselves untouchable. I have no friends, only employees who are terrified of disappointing me and enemies who are terrified of everything else. But none of that matters tonight. Tonight I am only a father. I have one child, Eleanor Grace Thorne, the only soft thing I ever managed to create in this hard world. When she was 6, she asked me why the sky was blue. I bought the theater, fired the director, and sat alone in the front row while my daughter played Juliet to an empty house. She never forgave me for it, and I never forgave myself. I realized that power meant you were the one who decided whether anyone heard the apology. 3 years ago, Eleanor married Damien Vance at a Napa vineyard. I waited in the car outside because she didn't want me to walk her down the aisle. I sat there for 4 hours, watching strangers take photos of my daughter, promising forever to a man who looked at her the way a wolf looks at a wounded deer. I should have stopped her, but I told myself lies because the truth was too painful. 2 days ago, she collapsed in the kitchen in Malibu. The ambulance report said Damien carried her out, screaming for help. The doctors diagnosed an unknown coma. However, the blood tests I paid a fortune to review showed something very different. Someone had been giving my daughter insulin she didn't need. Slowly, carefully, like poisoning a tree. The boardroom was still talking when my telephone lit up red at 2:17 p.m. I stood, the chair rolling back like a warning shot, and spoke 8 words that ended a life no one has buried yet. All accounts belonging to Damien Vance must be locked down within 1 hour. Activate the Minos protocol. The luxurious patient room, bathed in that expensive honey-colored light that only the very rich can afford to waste on unconscious daughters, felt almost sacred in its silence, while Damien Vance lingered at the bedside, phone held high, composing the perfect photograph of his comatose wife as though grief itself could be photographed, filtered, and served to 3 million followers who would never know the difference between sorrow and performance. He adjusted the angle once more, making certain the morning sun caught the diamond on her motionless hand and the single tear he had placed so carefully at the corner of her eye. Then spoke aloud in the tender voice he had rehearsed for weeks. "Stay strong for me, my love," he whispered, loud enough for the hidden microphone he believed no one knew about. "I'm right here. I will never leave you." And he let the words hang in the air like incense before pressing record on a 15-second clip he would later post with the caption, "Holding on to hope." When the recording ended, he checked the framing, nodded with satisfaction, and only then allowed his face to relax into the expression he wore when no one was watching. Cold, calculating, already counting the days until the funeral he would turn into a global event. He leaned down, brushed his lips across her forehead with theatrical tenderness. "Just a little longer, darling. Then everything that should have been mine will finally be mine." He straightened, smoothed the front of his white linen shirt, and took one final photograph, this time of their intertwined hands, his wedding band deliberately positioned to gleam against her pale skin before typing the message that would break hearts across 3 continents. Day 4 without her smile. Pray for us. Only after the post went live did he permit himself the smallest exhale of relief. Because every tear he manufactured now was another brick in the wall that would protect him, once the doctors, properly compensated, declared her condition irreversible, and the lawyers, equally compensated, transferred the last piece of Thorne family land into his name. He turned toward the door, already rehearsing the devastated expression he would wear for the nurses, when his phone buzzed with a notification he did not expect. The black American Express he had used an hour ago to buy lilies had been declined for a second time at the florist downstairs. Damien frowned, tapped the card against his palm the way a man does when he refuses to believe the world has begun to turn against him, and told himself it was nothing more than a temporary system error, the kind that happened to ordinary people, not to men who were days away from owning half of Malibu's coastline. He slipped the phone into his pocket, offered the unconscious woman one last practiced smile, and walked out, letting the heavy door close with its soft hydraulic sigh, while the diamond on Eleanor's finger continued to catch the light in tiny, deliberate flashes, as though it were signaling across a dark ocean to someone who already knew how to read the code. In the corridor, he nodded graciously to the duty nurse, thanked her for her kindness, and promised to return soon, never noticing that the woman's eyes followed him with something colder than professional sympathy, never noticing that the lilies he had ordered would never be delivered, because every account linked to the name Damien Vance had, in the last 47 minutes, ceased to exist in any meaningful way. And inside the honey-lit room, the monitors kept their steady, expensive rhythm. The ventilator breathed for the woman who did not need it, and the hidden camera had paid to have installed a year earlier, long before anyone dreamed of insulin or comas or murder, continued recording every second of the performance Damien believed was his, alone. I stepped down from the helicopter and the Pacific wind slapped me hard across the face, carrying the taste of salt and the promise that every second I had wasted pretending Damien Vance was anything more than a parasite was now going to cost him everything he had ever touched, while the dove-gray envelope in my hand felt heavier than any weapon I've ever carried, because inside it lay the single piece of paper that would strip him of the last illusion he still clung to. The belief that the yacht named after my daughter could ever belong to the man who tried to kill her. The Maybach swallowed the coastal road in silence, and I sat alone in the back watching the ocean glitter like broken glass, while I spoke aloud to the empty leather seat beside me. Because sometimes a man needs to hear his own voice state the truth before the world is forced to accept it. Power does not create monsters, I said, tasting the words the way a surgeon tastes blood before the blade goes in. Power only strips away the cheap disguises men wear when they think no one is strong enough to tear the mask off. And tonight, Damien Vance will stand naked in front of every camera he ever courted. Because the nature he has hidden behind perfect teeth and practiced tears is finally going to be magnified until even the devil flinches. I walked into the hospital's private wing without slowing, past nurses who knew better than to meet my eyes, until I reached the discreet office where Harlan Croft, Damien's Century City lawyer with the permanent tan and the permanent panic, waited with the expression of a man who has just realized the contract he signed in blood was written in disappearing ink. I placed the envelope on the mahogany desk between us and let the silence stretch until it became its own threat. Inside those pages, I told him, my voice so low he had to lean forward to catch every syllable, you will find the irrevocable trust documents executed the day Eleanor turned 25, proving that the Eleanor dream has never left Thorne family ownership and never will, no matter how many marriage certificates Damien waves at judges who owe him favors. Deliver this to your client within the hour. Tell him the boat he planned to sail into the sunset after my daughter's funeral is already flying my flag again, crewed by men who answer only to me. Tell him the name painted across the stern in gold leaf is the same name he tried to erase from the world. Croft's manicured hand hovered above the crimson wax seal as though it might explode. Marcus, he began, voice cracking like cheap veneer. Damien is devastated. The press is everywhere. This is not the moment to escalate a property dispute. I smiled, the way winter smiles at spring. There is no other moment, Harlan. When he opens that envelope and understands that the ocean he intended to disappear across now refuses to carry him, he will call you screaming for help you cannot give. Do not answer. By sundown, your firm will no longer represent my daughter in any capacity, because the side you have chosen is about to discover what happens when a man mistakes my patience for weakness." I turned and left him there, the envelope lying between us like a loaded gun he was now forced to carry. And as I walked the long corridor toward the room where Eleanor waited, I felt the theme of my entire life settle into my bones with the certainty of Scripture. Power magnifies nature, and the nature of Damien Vance is a small, greedy, murderous thing that has mistaken silence for surrender. But tonight the silence ends, and the magnification begins. I pushed open the door to the honey-lit suite. Eleanor lay exactly. I did not speak to the duty nurse. I simply looked at her until she found a reason to leave the room. I walked to the bedside and took my daughter's hand, then let my gaze travel up the clear IV line, past the pump that blinked its green heartbeat until I reached the chart clipped to the foot of the bed. The official records were pristine, pages of reassuring numbers and polite physician notes that spoke of undetermined metabolic crisis, and further testing indicated. But someone had slipped a single sheet of plain paper, folded once between the official toxicology report and the nursing flow sheet, the way a card cheat palms an ace. I opened the document with fingers that did not tremble, because I had buried many men without flinching, and what I read turned the temperature of the room to winter. The document was the test result for patient Eleanor Grace Thorne. The indicators showed very low C-peptide and extremely high serum insulin. The conclusion was that she had been injected with a large dose of exogenous insulin, while endogenous insulin production was virtually zero. Scribbled in blue ink beneath the numbers was a note indicating that the test was urgently requested by Dr. M. Reyes. The results were held back per administrative request, and the copy was only printed for the family. Not a tragic accident, not an overdose from a faulty pump, but a deliberate, calculated injection of pharmaceutical insulin in a dose large enough to drop a healthy woman into a coma, while leaving just enough brain activity for the machines to keep her legally alive until the paperwork could be signed. Someone had wanted her silent, but not yet dead. Someone who knew exactly how long the silence needed to last. I looked down at Eleanor's face, at the perfect stillness of her eyelids, at the diamond on her finger that still flashed its tiny warnings whenever the light shifted, and for the first time since the red envelope appeared on my screen in Chicago, I felt something sharper than rage. An ice-cold clarity that tasted almost like grief. I folded the report again, slid it inside my jacket pocket next to my heart where it belonged, and leaned close enough to smell the faint trace of the perfume she had worn since she was 16. "I know what he did," I whispered against her ear, not caring if she could hear me or if she was simply choosing not to. "And I know what you are doing. Keep playing, darling. Daddy is home now." Behind me, the door opened with the soft arrogance of a man who believes grief is a costume he can put on and take off at will. Damien Vance stepped into the room carrying a fresh bouquet of white roses and the expression of a widower who has already rehearsed his television interviews. I was still standing beside Eleanor's bed, the folded toxicology report burning against my chest like a live coal, when the door opened again and Damien entered with the careful choreography of a man who had rehearsed tragedy in front of too many mirrors. He carried no flowers this time. Instead, he carried the full weight of his legal rights wrapped in the softest voice he could manufacture. "Marcus," he began, eyes already glistening on command. "I just spoke with Dr. Chen and the ethics board. They're recommending we avoid any disruptive outside consultations while Eleanor is this fragile." He moved closer to the bed, placing one possessive hand over hers, wedding band glinting like a claim ticket. "As her husband, I have the sole authority over medical proxy. You know that, and I have to do what I believe is best for her peace. I want Dr. Margaret Stein from Cedars flown in tonight," I said quietly. "She is the foremost insulin coma specialist on the continent. She will review every milliliter that has entered my daughter's veins, and she will do it with my own laboratory team present." Damien's face shifted through 3 shades of practiced sorrow before settling on righteous indignation. "Absolutely not," he replied, voice rising just enough to remind that he was the grieving spouse, protecting his wife from an overbearing father. Eleanor trusted me with her advance directive for a reason. She was very clear: no experimental protocols, no media circus, no interference from outside financial influences. He let the last phrase hang like an accusation. I took 1 step toward him, close enough that he could smell the jet fuel still clinging to my coat from the flight I had forced across 3 time zones the moment I learned what he had done. "Damien," I said, soft as snowfall over a grave, "you have exactly 1 legal card to play, and you just laid it on the table. Congratulations. You have reminded me that the law still recognizes the word husband, even when it is attached to a murderer." His pupils flared. Then the mask slid back into place. "That is an outrageous accusation. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security." I smiled, the way winter smiles at anyone foolish enough to believe spring is coming. "Call them," I invited. "Call the ethics board. Call the hospital administrator who owes me the West Wing that bears my late wife's name. Call every lawyer you have left. By the time they arrive, the Minos protocol will already be chewing through the last of your offshore shelters. But please, waste the minutes you still possess." "I'm staying right here," he said, chin lifted in that defiant angle the cameras love. "As Eleanor's husband, I forbid any independent physician, any additional testing, any change to her current care team. The law is on my side, Marcus. Even you can't buy your way past a spouse's rights." I looked down at my daughter's motionless face, at the diamond that kept flashing its silent code, and I understood that the final door between justice and vengeance had just slammed shut with the full weight of California family law. "Very well," I said, and the gentleness in my voice made him take 1 involuntary step backward. "You have chosen the battlefield. Remember that when the war comes." I turned my back on him and walked out of the room without hurry, already dialing the only number that matters when the law becomes an obstacle instead of a tool. I walked the empty corridor until the fluorescent lights felt like interrogation lamps, then stepped into the small family lounge that smelled of burnt coffee and other people's grief, closed the door, and stood alone with the single question that now owned me. Do I pick up the phone and call the Los Angeles Police Department, hand over the toxicology report burning against my heart, and watch Damien be arrested in front of rolling cameras while lawyers turn my daughter's attempted murder into a 3-year circus? Or do I reach for the weapon no court can confiscate and end him in 48 hours without ever giving him the dignity of handcuffs? I've spent a lifetime buying judges, senators, entire regulatory agencies when necessary. Yet the idea of trusting 12 strangers in a jury box with my daughter's life made the bile rise in my throat. Police reports leak. Detectives can be bought. Spousal privilege still protects pillow talk. Damien would smile for the cameras, post another tearful video, and by the time the trial began, Eleanor could already be brain dead because the husband who poisoned her once would simply finish the job while the system debated admissibility. I opened my phone and stared at 2 saved numbers. One was Deputy Chief Daniel Ortega, a man who owes me favors large enough to retire on. The other was Victor Lang, my Chief Financial Officer and the only living soul who knows the complete architecture of the Minos Protocol. I pictured Damien in an orange jumpsuit, still preening, still believing publicity is oxygen. I pictured him in a courtroom, still holding Eleanor's medical proxy, still able to sign a "do not resuscitate" order the moment the jury looked away. I pictured him free on bail within hours because attempted murder of a billionaire's daughter is, ironically, a bailable offense in California if your lawyer is expensive enough. My thumb hovered. Then I saw Eleanor's face behind my eyelids. She deserved more than due process. I pressed the second number. Victor answered on the first ring with the calm of a man who has waited years for this exact call. "Sir, Victor," I said. and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone far older and far colder than the man who had boarded the jet that morning. The partial freeze I ordered earlier was only the overture. I want the full Minos protocol executed against Damien Vance and every entity he has ever touched. Leave him no credit, no collateral, no reputation, no escape route. I want him to wake up tomorrow owning nothing but the day after tomorrow. Do you understand? A pause so brief only I would notice. Completely, sir. Shall I include the medical entities on the list? Especially the medical entities. And Victor, make it hurt in ways he cannot explain on television. I confirmed I had just chosen the path of war. Within 1 hour, Damien would discover his black card was dead. Within 6 hours, his investors would vanish. Within 12 hours, the yacht he planned to flee on would belong to armed men who answer only to me. Within 48 hours, he would stand in that honey-lit room, begging for mercy from a comatose woman, something he would never receive. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the Pacific and speaking aloud to the dark water that had swallowed better men than him. You blocked the law, Damien. Congratulations. You just volunteered for a war where the only rule is my whim. I turned back toward Eleanor's door, already calculating how many minutes I could safely leave her unguarded while the first waves hit Damien's accounts, already tasting the moment he would discover his phone no longer worked and his name no longer opened doors. A strange nurse slipped into the honey-lit room with silent efficiency. She didn't knock or check the hall, just walked in and closed the door, leaving a gap precisely 2 inches wide. She reached for the IV bag above my daughter's bed. Through the narrow opening, I watched her detach the empty saline bag, replace it with a new one taken from her scrub pocket, and prime the line. The liquid inside the new bag was perfectly clear, but the way she leaned over to shield the label from the ceiling camera told me everything I needed to know. My hand was on the doorknob. She paused, glanced toward the bed once, and whispered something too small for me to hear clearly. Then she pressed 2 fingers to her lips, like a kiss or a warning, smoothed the blanket with excessive care, and slipped out just 12 seconds later. She passed me without looking up, her shoes silent on the polished floor, her badge turned away, and vanished around the corner as if she had never existed. I entered the room in 3 strides, ripped the new bag from the pole, and held it to the light. The label read, potassium chloride, 40 mech 100 msl. I realized that amount was enough to stop a heart in less than 4 minutes, making the death look like a tragic arrhythmia. The machines were still beeping steadily, but now I understood that rhythm was a countdown. Damien was not working alone. There was a second set of hands inside this room, paid or blackmailed or seduced, and they were already moving to the next stage while I was still learning the rules of the first. I crushed the potassium bag in my fist until the plastic split and the solution ran cold across my knuckles like blood that had not yet decided whose it wanted to be. I remained motionless in the concrete stairwell, the potassium still dripping from my clenched fist onto the rubber treads, when the burner phone vibrated again with the frantic insistence of someone who has just watched the sky fall and knows the ground is next. I pressed it to my ear, and the voice that spilled out belonged to a woman whose composure had shattered hours ago, and was now held together only by terror. Mr. Thorne, please don't hang up. My name is Seraphina Cole. I'm the primary night nurse for your daughter, and I swear on my children that I never wanted anyone to die. She was whispering so rapidly the words collided with one another, breath hitching between syllables. I only altered the insulin administration records because Damien promised it was just to keep her quiet for a few days, just until the zoning vote, just until the land transfer cleared, and then he paid me enough to erase my mother's medical debt. But when I heard the Minos protocol was live, when I saw his accounts freeze in real time on the Bloomberg terminal in the nurse's lounge, I understood he will kill anyone who can still talk, including me. I let the silence stretch until it became its own question. She filled it immediately. The real target has never been Eleanor's trust fund or the offshore accounts you're burning right now, she continued, voice trembling yet gaining speed as though speed itself might save her. It's the Big Sur parcel, 480 acres of undeveloped coastline that passed to Eleanor outright from her maternal grandmother 3 weeks ago, completely outside the marital estate, valued at $980 million the moment the Coastal Commission signs the resort permit scheduled for vote in 36 hours. If Eleanor dies after the vote, the land automatically reverts to the conservation trust written into the will. If she dies before, Damien inherits as surviving spouse and can liquidate immediately. That is why the insulin had to be slow, why the coma had to look accidental, why the potassium bag was delivered tonight, why he is preparing a do not resuscitate order he will claim. Eleanor whispered to him last month when no one else was listening. I closed my eyes and felt the stairwell tilt, because every syllable she spoke was a map I had drawn myself years earlier to protect my daughter from exactly this kind of predator, and now the predator had studied the map better than I ever imagined. "Serafina," I said, and the gentleness in my voice made her gasp. "Where are you right now?" "Level 3 parking garage, back row. I can't go home. I can't go back inside. There's another nurse he's using who switched the potassium bag 20 minutes ago, and she's still on the floor waiting for the next order. Lock your doors. Do not move. A black Suburban will pull beside you in 4 minutes. Get in without speaking. You will be safe." I ended the call and stared at the wall where the fluorescent light flickered like a dying heartbeat that had forgotten its rhythm. Serafina had given me the prize Damien was willing to murder for, the single piece of earth my wife had loved more than any house we ever owned. The coastline Eleanor used to fall asleep watching from her bedroom window when she was small. The Minos protocol is not a single blow. It is 1,000 blades falling at once, perfectly synchronized across 7 time zones, and I watched them land from the glass-walled command room Victor had converted in the hospital's sub-basement, screens glowing crimson with cascading cell orders, while Damien Vance's empire bled out in real time. At 0417 UTC, the satellite feed showed 3 matte black Thorn Security rigid-hulled inflatables converging on the Eleanor Dream 300 nautical miles west of Cabo. Within 90 seconds, armed boarding teams in unmarked dry suits were on the teak decks, captain's keys confiscated, crew confined below, the gold leaf name across the transom now flying my personal pennant instead of the fraudulent registry Damien had paid for in Panama. At 0421, the Tokyo market opened, and the first of the pre-programmed short positions detonated. Damien's shell companies lost 43% before the opening bell finished ringing, and by the time the sun touched the Pacific, his net worth had already dropped below zero. London woke to find every revolving credit facility yanked, every letter of credit dishonored, every hedge fund manager who had taken Damien's calls for the last 5 years suddenly unreachable. One partner was photographed leaving his Mayfair office carrying a single banker's box, while photographers later identified as containing only his children's drawings. In New York, the SEC received an anonymous package containing forged signature cards and backdated board minutes, proving Damien had been siphoning investor funds into personal accounts for 18 months. Trading in his SPAC was halted at 0932 Eastern, and the ticker symbol simply vanished from the board as though it had never existed. By noon, Pacific, his black cards were melting in waiters' hands from Malibu to Monaco. His private jet was grounded in Teterboro, with liens thicker than the fuselage, and the Beverly Hills mansion he had put in Eleanor's name to hide it from creditors was already surrounded by moving vans working under my direct order. Celebrity gossip sites exploded with leaked text threads showing Damien begging former friends for loans, then threatening them when they refused, then apologizing in increasingly frantic voice notes that ended with the sound of sobbing no acting coach on earth could have taught him. 46 hours after I spoke the words "full Minos" command, Damien Vance possessed nothing except the clothes he wore, a dead phone, and the growing certainty that the world had decided he no longer existed. I stood at the window of the sub-basement watching the final numbers settle into -9 figures when my secure phone vibrated once against my chest. The message came from Eleanor's registered number, the one lying dark on the bedside table in the honey-lit room upstairs. 2 words, cool and precise. Not enough. I stared at the screen until the letters burned themselves into my retinas, because the only fingers that could have typed that message belonged to a woman the machines insisted was deep in a coma, and yet the timestamp was 14 seconds ago. Someone inside that hospital bed had been watching every dollar I burned, every asset I seized, every tear Damien shed for the cameras, and she had decided my vengeance was still insufficient. I slipped into the honey-lit room at 3:15 in the morning, when the hospital corridors had fallen into that hushed, almost reverent quiet that only money and fear can buy, and found Eleanor lying exactly as the world expected. Yet the diamond on her right hand had been rotated 1 deliberate quarter turn counterclockwise. The private signal we created the summer she was 9, and thunderstorms rattled the Malibu house. A silent promise that meant I am awake. I am waiting. Come close, Daddy. Because everything you think you know is about to change. I dimmed the overhead lights until only the blue-green glow from the monitors remained, then sat on the edge of the bed the way I used to when nightmares chased her sleep. And with fingers that had just erased a man's existence from 7 continents, I gently lifted her hand, twisted the platinum setting another quarter turn, and watched the stone lift like the lid of a secret locket to reveal a cavity no larger than a tear. Inside rested a black micro SD card, so small it could have been mistaken for a fleck of shadow. I carried it to the secure tablet I always keep in my breast pocket, inserted the card with the care one reserves for unexploded ordnance, and pressed play while the ventilator continued its steady, deceptive rhythm. Eleanor's face filled the screen, filmed in this very room 3 nights earlier, cheeks flushed with fierce determination rather than coma pallor, eyes blazing with the same unbreakable will I remembered from the day she learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels and refused to let me hold the seat. She held a vial of pharmaceutical insulin in one hand and a syringe in the other, drawing the clear liquid with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed the moment until it felt like destiny. "Dad," she began, voice low enough, yet steady enough to cut straight through every layer of protection I had ever built around her. "If you're watching this, then Damien has already tried to kill me. You have already unleashed the Minos protocol, and the world believes I am lying here helpless." Good. That is exactly what I needed them to believe. She capped the syringe, set it carefully on the bedside table, and leaned closer to the lens so that her face filled the entire frame. 6 weeks ago, I found the forged transfer documents for the Big Sur land hidden inside the lining of Damien's briefcase, along with emails proving he had been planning this since the day grandmother's will was read. I confronted him that night. He cried, he begged, he promised to change, and when I told him I was going to the police, he smiled. The smile I now know meant the decision had already been made. So I installed the pinhole camera behind the smoke detector. I researched the exact dose of insulin that would drop me into a convincing coma without permanent damage, and I waited. When he finally came at me with the needle, I fought just hard enough to leave bruises for the cameras, then let him inject me, because I knew the only way to make them speak freely, to make them reveal every detail of the potassium plan and the DNR order and the zoning vote deadline, was to disappear completely and let them believe they had won. She paused, and for the first time her voice trembled with regret. She expressed apology for not being able to warn me, and for me having to fly across the country thinking my daughter was dying. She said she needed me to feel that rage, because only my rage would panic Damien, and only the Minos protocol would push him and Serafina out into the light where the hidden camera could record every word. She instructed me to continue destroying Damien. Seize the yacht, freeze every account, and let the world watch him crumble. She asked me to make them believe they had lost everything and then bring them to the Eleanor dream. She said she would take care of the rest. She finished by saying, "I love you, Dad. See you soon." She blew a small kiss toward the lens, the same kiss she used to blow when I dropped her off at school and the screen went dark. I sat motionless on the edge of the bed, tablet warm against my palm, while the monitors continued their lying symphony and the truth rewrote every plan I had made to protect her, because my daughter had not needed protection at all. She had orchestrated the entire performance, chosen the poison, timed the coma, and used my own vengeance as the perfect distraction. I had only just restored the ventilator to its proper settings, watching Eleanor's oxygen saturation climb gracefully back toward 100, while Damien and Serafina fled down the corridor like rats abandoning a burning ship, when the secure tablet in my pocket vibrated with two simultaneous alerts that turned the victory I had tasted only seconds earlier into something far more bitter. The first was an email from the night clerk of the United States District Court for the Central District of Central California. A federal judge, one whose re-election campaign had received generous support from certain coastal developers with ties to the Big Sur project, had signed an emergency temporary restraining order at 04:42 a.m., barring Marcus Thorne and all affiliated entities from accessing, influencing, or obtaining copies of Eleanor Grace Thorne Vance's medical records, citing credible evidence of predatory financial overreach intended to interfere with lawful spousal medical authority. In plain language, Damien, penniless and cornered, had found one last judge willing to believe his tears long enough to slam the door on any official proof that Eleanor had ever been poisoned. The second alert came from the satellite tracker embedded in the Eleanor Dream's hull. The yacht had weighed anchor from its forced holding position off Cabo, engines now at flank speed heading south-southwest toward international waters, running lights extinguished. AIS transponder dark someone on board still believed the Pacific was wide enough to hide in. I stood motionless beside Eleanor's bed, tablet in one hand, the other resting on her shoulder, and felt the ground shift again beneath me, because the law had just chosen the murderer over the victim. The ocean had just chosen the murderer over justice. Eleanor's fingers, cool but steady, closed around my wrist with surprising strength. "They're trying to erase me twice," she whispered, voice hoarse from disuse yet perfectly clear. "Once with poison, once with paper. Don't let them." Her eyes were open now, green and fierce and utterly unafraid, exactly the way they had looked the day she told me she was marrying Damien, despite every warning I never quite managed to speak aloud. I leaned close enough that only she could hear. "The judge can keep the medical records," I said. "He cannot keep the video you recorded, and the ocean has never been wide enough to hide from me." She smiled then, the first real smile I had seen from her in years, and it contained more steel than forgiveness. "Then let them run," she answered. "Let them believe the yacht is still theirs. Let Damien think the restraining order bought him time. We will meet them where they feel safest, and we will finish this the way it should have ended the day he first looked at the Big Sur coastline and saw only dollar signs." I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead the way I had when she was small and the world still made sense. "Rest for one more hour," I told her. "Then we leave this hospital gowns and federal judges behind. The Eleanor Dream is waiting, and this time she will carry the people who actually own her." She closed her eyes again, but the smile remained, sharp and patient and utterly Thorne. I looked down at her and saw not fear, but calculation, the same expression she wore at 12 when she beat the school chess champion by sacrificing her queen on move 9. "They're wrong," she continued. "The yacht isn't running away from you. It's running toward the only place left where Damien still believes he can disappear, and Serafina is on board." The satellite feed refreshed. Thermal imaging showed 3 heat signatures on the aft deck, one pacing frantically, one hunched over the rail vomiting fear into the black water, and one moving with the deliberate calm of someone who had just made a very different decision. Serafina. The same woman who, just hours earlier, stood by Eleanor's bedside with Damien and calmly increased the propofol dosage while murmuring hypoxic brain damage before dawn in a voice devoid of remorse, was now, according to the thermal imaging on the satellite feed, one of the only 3 living souls on the Eleanor Dream as it crawled south through the dark water. She was either fleeing with the man whose orders she had obediently followed, or she was fleeing from him, because even murderers could become inconvenient witnesses when the money disappeared. While the temporary restraining order still glowed on my screen like a death sentence signed in bureaucratic ink, a new message arrived over the encrypted network Victor reserved for confidential extractions. The sender was a burner account registered to Serafina's sister in Fresno. The text was short, desperate, and perfectly spelled in the way only genuine horror can achieve. Tell Thorne I have the original syringe, the one with his fingerprints and my blood on the plunger, plus the pharmacy distribution logs proving premeditation. Everything is in the mid-deck safe, code 2814 sign. I want full immunity, a new passport, and a 24-hour head start. In exchange, he can have Damien gift-wrapped and the real murder charge will stick. Tell him I'm tired of drowning for a man who doesn't have a dime left to pay me. Eleanor, now propped up on her pillows, read the message over my shoulder and let out a small, dry laugh that contained no humor, only the satisfaction of one who has watched every last rat scramble for the same shrinking plank. She just discovered that guilt weighs less than concrete shoes, Eleanor said, her voice still husky from the breathing tube removed an hour earlier. Let her continue to believe we are coming to rescue her. Let her open the safe for us. Let her hand us the syringe with Damien's fingerprints still warm. By the time she realizes the only immunity she will receive is from ever feeling safe again, the only life raft left afloat will be the truth, and it will have both their names carved into the wood. I looked from the glowing screen to my daughter. No longer the fragile victim I had crossed a continent to save, but the architect who had used my rage as raw material and felt the full, crushing weight of the moment everyone calls all is lost settle upon me like the winter ocean. Every courtroom door was barred by a judge who preferred Damien's tears to a toxicology report. Every official record was sealed behind federal red tape I couldn't cut without years of appeals. The prey had slipped every legal noose and was racing toward international waters with the only witness who could still save or condemn them. Yet that very witness had just reached through the darkness and begged me to come aboard. The darkest hour, I understood, was not when hope died, but when hope changed sides and started wearing the enemy's face. Answer her, Eleanor said softly, her eyes gleaming with the same cold fire I saw in my own mirror every morning. Tell Serafina the deal is accepted. Tell her we're going to be the last lie she ever tells with her own mouth. I typed the reply with steady fingers. Offer accepted. Hold position 50 miles south of Cabo. We arrive at dawn. Guaranteed safe passage. I looked from the tablet to the woman I had believed needed protecting and understood that the darkest moment had arrived. Every legal door slammed, every official evidence locked away, the prey apparently slipping the noose one last time. I sat alone in the violet half-light of the sub-basement command room, the tablet balanced on my knee like a confession I was no longer sure I wanted to hear, and let Eleanor's recorded voice wash over me for the 8th time while the hospital above slept beneath the illusion that my daughter was still lost to a coma she had orchestrated herself. Every cadence of her calm, merciless explanation had already carved itself into my memory, yet something still tugged at the edge of consciousness, a detail that refused to stay buried, until I paused the frame at exactly 14 minutes and 7 seconds and zoomed slowly, deliberately, until the pixels surrendered their secret. There, in the upper left corner, deliberately centered so that no viewer could possibly miss it, the tiny red diode of a second camera glowed against the white ceiling tile like a single, unblinking eye that had been watching long before Eleanor ever lifted the insulin vial. She had angled her phone not merely to record her own face, but to capture proof that another lens had already been waiting in the dark. My breath caught, because I suddenly understood that the performance I had witnessed was only the final act she had chosen to show me. I opened the cloud archive linked to that hidden lens and watched the timestamps roll backward through weeks, then months, then seasons, until the first file appeared. 14 months ago, the morning after Damien had proposed under a shower of fireworks I myself had paid for. There was Eleanor, standing on a small step stool in soft dawn light, drilling the pinhole with the same steady hand she once used to build model ships with me, humming the lullaby I sang when thunderstorms frightened her at 6, threading cable through the crown molding like a surgeon closing an invisible wound. Clip after clip unspooled across the screen. Damien alone in the bedroom practicing grief in the mirror. Damien on speakerphone promising investors the Big Sur coastline would be delivered clean within 18 months. Damien stroking Eleanor's hair while she pretended to sleep and whispering how perfect everything would be once the accident removed the final obstacle. Through every frame she lay motionless, eyes closed, breathing even, letting him bury himself deeper with every careless word, every arrogant laugh, every murmured threat. 14 months. Before the wedding, before the prenup. Before I ever allowed myself to believe he might be worthy, I closed my eyes and felt the floor fall away because the daughter I had crossed a continent to protect had never needed protection at all. She had been the hunter since the night he slipped a ring on her finger and looked past her shoulder at the coastline glittering behind her. Eleanor's voice came from the doorway, soft yet edged with steel. "You found the real beginning," she said, stepping into the violet light, still wearing the oversized scrubs, IV line dangling like a forgotten leash. "I was wondering how many times you would need to watch before you saw the camera I wanted you to see." I turned the tablet so she could watch her younger self install the trap that had just sprung on all of us. 14 months, I repeated, the words tasting like ash and awe. "You married him knowing exactly what he was." "I married him," she answered, walking forward until moonlight from the high window painted silver across the face I thought I knew. "Because the only way to destroy a monster is to let it believe it has already won. I needed evidence no court could dismiss, no lawyer could spin. I needed him to speak freely for a year while the red light blinked and the cloud filled with his own confession. And I needed you, Dad, to burn his world so completely that when the truth finally surfaced, the world would call it justice instead of vengeance." She placed her palm over my heart, the way she had when she was small, and the dark felt too large. "I could not tell you," she whispered. "If you had known, you would have stopped the wedding, or killed him yourself, or locked me in a tower. I had to walk through the fire alone so the ashes would spell his name for everyone to read." I covered her hand with mine and felt every year of misplaced protection fall away. "Then we finish it together," I said, voice steady for the first time matching the steel in hers. "On the yacht that bears your name. In front of every camera Serafina believes will save her. We give them the spectacle they spent 14 months earning." Eleanor smiled, and the expression reached all the way into her eyes for the first time since she was a child. "Let them run to the middle of the ocean," she said. "Let them believe distance still matters. We will arrive at dawn with 14 months of truth burning in our hands, and we will burn the last lie they have left right off their tongues." The Eleanor Dream drifted 50 miles south of Cabo, engines idling in a sea so calm it looked polished, her running lights dark, her new Panamanian registry already flagged in every port from here to Panama as belonging to a shell company that dissolved the moment it was used. My people had boarded at 03:17 local time, replaced the skeleton crew Damien believed loyal, restored the original Thorn registry, and wired every stateroom, every deck, every crystal glass in the Sky Lounge with discrete 8K cameras feeding directly to a satellite uplink no federal judge could touch. The yacht was mine again, absolutely, irrevocably, and waiting like a stage set for the final act. Eleanor stood beside me in the command center of the fast tender, slicing through the pre-dawn black, hair tied back, hospital scrubs traded for simple linen that made her look younger than her 32 years, eyes reflecting the green glow of the screens. She watched the thermal feed. 3 heat signatures on the aft deck, Damien pacing, Serafina chain-smoking at the rail, and the third, the captain I had paid to play turncoat until the moment mattered. "They still believe they're escaping," she said quietly, voice carrying the hush of someone who has waited 14 months for this exact dawn. "They think the restraining order bought them time and the ocean bought them distance. Let them keep believing." I nodded to Victor on the secure channel. "Open the sat phone line. Patch me through to Damien's burner." The connection clicked, and Damien's voice spilled out, ragged with exhaustion and false bravado. "Thorn," he began, the word cracking halfway through. I know you're listening. I know you're coming. We don't have to do this like animals. Meet me on the yacht at sunrise. Neutral ground, settlement negotiation. You want Eleanor's peace of mind? I want a clean exit. Bring the original ownership papers for the Big Sur parcel. The ones that prove it's still in her name alone, and I'll sign whatever you want. No cameras, no lawyers, just us, the ocean, and an end to this nightmare. Eleanor's smile was small, sharp, and utterly without mercy. He still thinks the land is his last card, she whispered. He still thinks if he holds the deed in his hand, he can bargain his way out of what he did. I pressed the transmit button. Sunrise, I answered, letting my voice carry the weight of every dollar I had stripped from him in the last 72 hours. I'll bring the papers. You bring yourself. And Damien, if you're not alone on that deck when I arrive, the ocean will be the least of your problems. The line went dead. Eleanor turned to me, eyes glittering in the green light. He'll bring Serafina, she said. He needs a witness he believes he still controls, and he'll wave those ownership papers like a white flag right up until the moment he realizes the flag is wired with 14 months of his own confession. I opened the titanium briefcase etier at my feet and lifted the thick folder inside. The original Big Sur parcel deeds, sealed in plastic, watermarked, notarized, and, unknown to anyone but Eleanor and me, embedded with a micro-transmitter that would broadcast the moment the seal was broken, streaming live to every major outlet already primed for the feed. The land was never the prize. It was the bait. Let him see it, Eleanor said, reading my silence perfectly. Let him hold it. Let him believe salvation is finally in his hands. Then we walk onto that deck, alive and smiling, and watch the last lie he has left turn to ash in his fingers. The tender slowed as the silhouette of the Eleanor Dream rose against the first pale streak of dawn, teak decks gleaming, gold lettering catching the light like a promise written in fire. I took Eleanor's hand. Ready? I asked. She squeezed once, the childhood code for always. The sun had only just begun to bleed gold across the horizon when Eleanor and I stepped silently onto the aft deck of the Eleanor Dream. The teak still cool with night, the Pacific stretching away in every direction like a mirror polished for judgment. And there stood Damien with his back to us, crystal flute already lifted in a premature toast to freedom he believed he had stolen, while Serafina clutched the titanium briefcase containing the Big Sur deeds that were never truly his to hold. Every hidden 8K camera my people had installed during the silent retaking of the vessel was already broadcasting live to servers beyond any court's reach. Oh, and the world watched in perfect silence as Damien turned, smile freezing, flute slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers to explode in a glittering spray of champagne and crystal that caught the first rays of sunrise like scattered diamonds falling into blood. Eleanor walked forward slowly, barefoot on the warm wood, until she stood close enough for him to smell the faint hospital antiseptic still clinging to her skin, and spoke in a voice soft enough to carry across every live feed yet sharp enough to cut bone. "Hello, darling," she said, letting the endearment hang in the air like a noose. "You were about to toast my successful murder, weren't you?" Damien's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged except the ragged gasp of a man discovering the grave he dug already occupied. Serafina dropped the briefcase with a metallic clatter and stumbled backward until the rail, hands scrabbling for balance that would never come. I did not raise my voice, did not need to, because every hidden microphone was already drinking in the moment. I simply lifted the small silver recorder so every lens could see it, pressed play, and let the past speak for itself. My own voice, raw with grief 16 years old, filled the sky lounge and every screen on Earth. "Promise me, Marcus. Promise you'll protect her from the truth about her real father, about the affair, about everything the world would weaponize against an innocent child." And my answer, broken and fierce and absolute. "She is my daughter in every way that matters. I will burn cities before I let anyone hurt her with accidents of blood. She will only ever know unconditional love from me. Always." The recording ended. The only sound was the wind moving across empty ocean and the soft, almost childlike sob that escaped Eleanor's throat as 16 years of carefully nurtured resentment shattered in the space of a heartbeat. She turned to me, tears sliding freely down cheeks that had refused weakness for 14 months, and whispered, "All this time I thought you kept me at arm's length because I wasn't truly yours. I thought the coldness, the control, the endless tests were proof you were ashamed. I married a monster to prove I could survive without you, when all you ever did was love me too much to let the world hurt me with a truth I never needed to carry." I opened the leather folio I carried and withdrew the single sheet that mattered, holding it so every camera could see the seal. "This," I said, voice carrying to satellites and strangers alike, "is Eleanor Grace Thorne's revised testament, executed at 0411 this morning. It disinherits Damien Vance from every asset, trust, and future inheritance. It revokes all medical proxy authority granted during the marriage. And it transfers sole ownership of the Big Sur parcel 480 to the Conservation Trust in perpetuity, exactly as her mother wished the night she died in my arms." I let the document fall onto the teak between us like a gauntlet. Damien lunged for it, fingers shaking, but Eleanor placed one bare foot on the paper and looked down at him with the calm of someone who has already won everything worth winning. "You wanted the land," she said gently. "Take the ashes instead." Serafina collapsed to her knees, begging, offering testimony, offering anything, but Eleanor looked at her once with something almost like pity. "You chose the wrong grave to dig," Eleanor told her. "The tide remembers everything." I pressed the final button. Every screen on the yacht, every phone across the planet, began playing 14 months of hidden footage. Damien's confessions, his plans, his practiced tears, his whispered threats, while Eleanor lay still and waited. Serafina let out a thin, keening sound and slid down the rail until she sat on the teak, knees drawn to her chest, rocking slightly as the footage rolled on. Her own whispered assurances to Damien about hypoxic brain injury, now broadcast in high definition for every viewer who had ever trusted a nurse's smile. Within moments, the horizon filled with approaching helicopters, Coast Guard cutters racing in formation, news choppers with call letters blazing, private charters carrying lawyers, and influencers who suddenly understood the story had changed forever. Because the world had just witnessed justice serve itself without a single courtroom, without a single gavel, only the cold, unblinking truth delivered by cameras no one knew existed until the moment they were needed most. Damien sank fully to the deck then, knees buckling, hands scrabbling uselessly at the polished wood as though he could dig his way out of what he had become, while the footage looped to the worst moments. His drunken confession that he had seen Eleanor's eyes move under the lids, but it no longer mattered because the needle was coming anyway, and the sound of his own laughter filled the morning air like poison. Eleanor stepped carefully over his outstretched fingers without looking down, took my hand with the same trust she had shown when she was 5 and believed I could stop thunderstorms, and together we walked to the rail where the sunrise painted the water in molten gold that seemed to stretch forever. Behind us, the man who had tried to bury my daughter and the woman who had helped him were already shrinking into footnotes, voices drowned by rotor wash and the relentless loop of their own words. Eleanor leaned her head against my shoulder exactly the way she used to when the world still made sense, and whispered so only I could hear, "It's finished, Dad. We're free." Power, I thought as the helicopters circled closer and the ocean carried away the last echo of Damien's ruined voice, does not corrupt. It simply reveals. And today, for the first time in 16 years, it revealed everything exactly as it was always meant to be. A father and daughter standing together at the edge of the world, watching the sunrise burn away every shadow that had ever tried to come between us. Did you like my story? What city are you from? See me in the comments. If you like it, support me with super thanks so I can continue telling stories like this. Thank you so much for your amazing support. I look forward to your comments. On screen, you will see 2 new, real-life stories that I highly recommend. There are many more stories on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next story. with all love and respect.